The Bloodstone Tavern wasn't a place for the gentle. It was a living, breathing beast, its heart the thunderous rhythm of clashing tankards and raucous laughter, its lungs filled with the smoke of pipe leaf and roasting meat. To the Lycans who dominated its scarred wooden tables, it was a sanctuary of ale and boasting. To the humans who served them, it was a minefield of shifting tempers and sharp teeth, where survival was a performance played with downcast eyes and silent steps. My name is Alara. For 3 years I have perfected the art of being a ghost in this place. My world was a narrow path between the kitchen's steaming heat and the crowded floor, my existence defined by the weight of a laden tray and the echo of growled orders. I moved like mist, my gray servant's dress blending into the stone walls, my gaze forever fixed on the sawdust-covered floor. To them, I was nothing, a pair of hands to bring ale, a silent form to absorb insults, a creature so harmless I was barely worth noticing, and that was precisely how I needed it to be. Tonight, the beast was particularly restless. A fresh caravan of traders from the northern passes had arrived, and with them came stories that made the warriors rowdy and the nobles watchful. I navigated the chaos, a tray of frothing ale balanced on my palm, my senses cataloging threats as I always did. Lord Kylar of his retinue by the fire, their voices already too loud. Captain Vorik's men near the dartboard, their competition turning sharp. And in the shadowed booth at the back, the one that always made my skin prickle, Prince Kieran, the king's only son. He was young, with the cruel beauty of a winter frost, his golden eyes scanning the room with the bored arrogance of someone who had never been denied a thing. He was surrounded by his usual pack of sycophants, their laughter a brittle, mocking sound. I gave the booth a wide berth, delivering my ales to a table of miners, their conversation a low rumble about a collapsed tunnel. "Girl, more wine here." The shout came from Lord Kalar's table. I nodded, my "yes, my lord," barely a whisper as I collected empty flagons. As I turned, a massive ale-slick hand shot out and clamped around my wrist. It was one of Kalar's men, a brute named Goran, his breath reeking of onions and malice. "What's your hurry, little mouse?" he slurred, his grip tightening. "Stay a while. Tell us a human story, something tragic. I do love a tragedy." A cold stillness settled in my chest. This was the dance. The choice was always the same: struggle and provoke greater violence, or play along and hope the amusement ended quickly. I let my body go limp, the picture of terrified submission. "Please, sir, the wine for your lord." "My lord can wait," Goran chuckled, pulling me closer. The men at the table laughed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Prince Kieran watching from his booth, a faint, interested smile on his lips. He was enjoying the show. Then something changed. Perhaps it was the particular sneer on Goran's face. Perhaps it was the memory of another hand, in another life, that had gripped me just like that before going forever still. Or perhaps, after 1,000 days of swallowing fear, the cup was simply full. My free hand moved. Not a wild slap, not a frantic push. It was a precise, almost gentle tap of 2 fingers against the inside of Goran's elbow, a specific nerve cluster. His hand spasmed open as if burned. Before his drunken brain could process the shock, I had smoothly twisted my wrist free and taken 2 steps back, my tray still steady, my eyes now meeting his. The laughter at the table died. Goran stared at his own hand, then at me, confusion and dawning rage warring in his bloodshot eyes. "You little—" "Your wine, my lord," I said, turning to place the fresh flagon before a surprised Lord Kalar. My voice was still soft, but it no longer trembled. It was flat, calm, deadly calm. I walked away, feeling their stares on my back like physical weights. That was a mistake. A tiny, terrible crack in my carefully constructed mask. I had reacted with skill, not luck. I hurried toward the kitchen's relative safety, but a new voice, smooth as oiled steel, cut through the din and froze me in my tracks. Well, that was interesting. Prince Kieran had left his booth and now stood directly in my path. He circled me slowly, his golden eyes missing nothing, the way I held the tray, the set of my shoulders, the fact that my breath was even while my heart hammered against my ribs. "I've never seen a servant disengage so effectively," he mused, his voice carrying to the now silent tables nearby. "Where does a tavern wench learn a trick like that?" "A life of service teaches many things, Your Highness, often how to avoid spills." "Avoid spills," he repeated, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Is that what you call it? It looked more like you knew exactly where to hit him." He stopped in front of me. "Look at me." I lifted my gaze. Mistake number 2. His eyes bored into mine, and for a fleeting second I didn't see a spoiled prince. I saw a predator, intelligent and dangerous. And he saw something in my storm-gray eyes that wasn't fear. It was assessment, calculation. "You're not like the others, are you?" he whispered, so only I could hear. Then, louder for his audience, "Let's test that theory. I'm thirsty. Fetch me a bottle of the 47 vintage from the high cellar. Alone." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The high cellar was a dark, isolated labyrinth of shelves. For a prince to order a human servant there alone was not about wine. It was a message. It was a trap. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to run, to disappear into the night. But refusal meant immediate punishment, possibly death. Acceptance meant walking into his private web. The mask was not just cracked now, it was crumbling. I dipped into a curtsy. "As you command, Your Highness." The walk to the cellar stairs felt like a march to the gallows. The raucous noise of the tavern faded behind me, replaced by the hollow echo of my own footsteps on cold stone. The air grew damp and chill. As I reached for the iron ring of the cellar door, a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature raced down my spine. I was being watched from the shadows of the stairwell above. Not by Kieran, he was still holding court below. By someone else. I pushed the heavy door open and slipped into the profound darkness. I didn't need a lantern. My eyes had long adjusted to low light. I moved between the towering racks, my fingers brushing dusty bottlenecks. My mind racing. I had to think. The 47 vintage was at the very back, in the oldest section. I found the bottle. As I lifted it from its resting place, a sliver of parchment, tucked neatly beneath it, fluttered to the floor. Frowning, I picked it up. It was no wine label. It was a map, drawn in precise, familiar lines. A map of the castle's lower dungeons, with a single route highlighted in red ink. And at the bottom, a symbol that stole the breath from my lungs. A crescent moon pierced by a single dagger. The sigil of the Silent Sisters, a sisterhood that was said to have been exterminated a decade ago. A sisterhood I had once been trained to join. This was no accident. This was a message. For me. The cellar door groaned open. I crumpled the parchment into my palm, hiding it in my fists as I turned, the bottle held before me like a pathetic shield. It wasn't Prince Kieran. It was an older man, his hair silver at the temples, his face etched with the quiet authority of command. He wore rich but unadorned clothing. I had never seen him in the tavern before, but I knew him instantly from the descriptions whispered among servants. King Theodric. He stood there, silhouetted in the doorway, studying me. His gaze was not lecherous like his son's, nor brutish like Goran's. It was analytical, dissecting. He looked at the bottle in my hands, then at my face, and finally at my clenched fist. "You found what you were looking for, I see." His voice was a low rumble that vibrated in the silent cellar. My blood ran cold. He knew about the note. Was this his trap, not Kieran's? Had my 3 years of hiding ended not with a bang, but with a whispered conversation in a wine cellar? "I was sent for the 47 vintage, Your Majesty," I said, forcing my voice to steadiness. "Indeed," he replied, stepping fully into the cellar and letting the door swing shut behind him, plunging us into near total darkness. I could still see the faint gleam of his eyes. My son has a taste for fine things, and for games. He took another step closer. But you, girl, you don't play by the rules of his games, do you? The way you handled Gorin, the way you hold yourself now in the dark, with your king. You are not afraid of the dark. You are afraid of what the light might reveal. He was too close to the truth. I said nothing, the parchment a burning secret in my hand. There is a storm coming, King Theodric said, his voice dropping even lower. A storm my court cannot see, but its winds are already stirring. I need eyes that can see in this darkness. I need someone who understands that the deadliest weapon is the one everyone has forgotten. He reached out, not to grab me, but to tap the back of my clenched fist. The sisters send their regards, and their warning. The man who betrayed them, who ordered the purge that killed your mentors, he is here, in my city, and he is planning something that will drown this kingdom in blood. He turned and walked back to the door, pausing with his hand on the iron ring. Bring the wine to my son. Smile. Be the ghost, but know this, Alara. The time for hiding is over. Dawn is coming, and you must choose. Will you fade with the shadows, or will you stand in the light and remember what you truly are? He left, closing the door softly behind him. I stood alone in the dark, the weight of the wine bottle in one hand, the crushing weight of the past in the other. The parchment in my fist felt like a live coal. The silent sisters were alive. My mentor's killer was here, and the king, the most powerful Lycan in the realm, had just offered me a choice I thought I'd never have to make. The ghost of Alara the servant trembled. But beneath it, something older, fiercer, and long buried began to stir. A name from a forgotten life whispered in the deepest part of my soul. They thought I was a mouse. They thought I was prey. But the hunters were about to learn a terrible truth. Sometimes the quietest whisper can herald the most devastating storm. The walk back through the tavern was a blur of noise and shadow. The bottle of 47 vintage felt like an anchor in my hand, a tangible reminder of the impossible choice now laid before me. Prince Kieran's smug smile as I presented it, his fingers brushing mine with deliberate possessiveness, barely registered. My mind was in the cellar, with the king's words and the crumpled map burning a hole in my secret pocket. The man who betrayed them, he is here. The rest of my shift passed in a surreal daze. I moved, I served, I bowed, but the performance was hollow. The mask of Alara, the servant, was slipping, and the face beneath it was one I hadn't dared examine in years. When the final patrons staggered out and the great oak doors of the Bloodstone Tavern were bolted shut, the silence that fell was heavier than any noise. In the cramped attic I called home, a space barely large enough for a cot and a wash basin, I finally unfolded the parchment. Moonlight filtered through a single grimy window, illuminating the precise lines. The castle dungeons. The red path led not to a cell, but to a dead-end chamber marked with a single tiny symbol, a flame within a crescent. The sigil of the eternal flame. It was a code within a code, a message only a sister would understand. It pointed to the old archives, the sealed section where records of the sisterhood's dealings with the crown were kept, records that were supposed to have been ash a decade ago. The king knew I was a sister, or had been training to become one. The purge came in my 16th summer, a night of fire and screams. I'd escaped because my mentor, Anya, had shoved me into a drainage culvert with a hiss of, "Live, Alara, forget us and live." I had tried. For 3 years I had buried Anya's lessons, the silent steps, the pressure points, the art of becoming unseen, deep beneath layers of servitude and fear. But the king had seen through it all with a single glance. Sleep was impossible. The ghosts of my past were no longer silent. I saw Anya's fierce smile, heard her stern voice correcting my stance. Strength is not in the muscle, child, but in the mind, the will. We are the whispers that topple thrones, the shadows that guard the light. We were peacekeepers, negotiators, spies for a council that sought balance between human and Lycan realms, until someone sold us out for Lycan gold. A soft, rhythmic tapping at my window nearly stopped my heart. It was the cadence of the old sisterhood's all-clear signal. Heart in my throat, I crept to the window and peered down into the alley below. A hooded figure stood in a pool of shadow, face invisible. One hand lifted, making 3 quick, specific gestures. Danger, ally, dawn. Then they melted back into the darkness. They were here, watching. The sisters, or what was left of them, were not just a memory. They were a presence, and they were activating me. The king's offer and the sisters' warning were 2 sides of the same deadly coin. To remain a ghost was to condemn myself to a slow death of fear and possibly allow a greater evil to rise. To step into the light was to paint a target on my back for every enemy of the sisters, for Prince Kieran's pride, and for the traitor who thought he had wiped us all out. When dawn's first gray light touched the sky, my decision was made. It wasn't born of courage, but of a cold, clear understanding. Hiding was no longer safety, it was a slower form of surrender. Anya did not die for me to spend my life serving ale to brutes. I dressed in my plainest gray dress, but today I did not pull my sleeves down to hide the faint, silvery scars on my forearms, tokens from training with blunted daggers. I left my hair loose instead of in the tight, servile bun. Small changes, but they felt monumental. The ghost was preparing to become something else. My work at the tavern began as always, but my senses were heightened, tuned to a different frequency. I watched not just for spilled ale or grabbing hands, but for patterns. Who spoke to whom? Which guards changed shifts at the castle gate? I listened to the trader's gossip with new ears, sifting for mentions of strange mercenaries, unusual shipments, or whispers of old magic. It was mid-afternoon when a new group arrived, their entrance sucking the warmth from the room. They were Lycans, but not local packs. Their leathers were dyed a deep forest green, their bearing militantly precise. At their head was a man with cold, calculating blue eyes and a severe face framed by dark hair. Lord Malachor, a name I'd heard in terrified whispers from other servants. He was a border lord, a warlord who had grown powerful and distant from the king's rule, and he was looking directly at Prince Kieran's booth. The prince, to my dismay, waved him over with a magnanimous gesture. The 2 factions merged, and a hushed, intense conversation began. I was ordered to bring their table the strongest spirits. As I poured, doing my best to be invisible wallpaper, I caught fragments. The eastern minds are played out, but the veins we discussed— Malachor's voice was a low thrum. My father is traditional. He fears the old ways, Kieran replied, swirling his drink. Progress requires vision, Your Highness, and the courage to grasp new tools. The artifacts we unearthed are mere keys. The real power lies in— A sharp look from one of Malachor's lieutenants silenced him as he noticed my presence. I bowed, hurried away, but my mind was racing. Artifacts? Old ways? This was more than political maneuvering. This smelled of forbidden magic, the kind the sisterhood was founded to contain. My suspicions solidified into cold dread an hour later. A kitchen boy, trembling, brought a message to the barkeeper, who then looked straight at me. Ilara, the prince requires a private delivery to the Griffin's Perch chamber, now. The Griffin's Perch was a private meeting room on the upper floor of the tavern, used for deals no one wanted witnessed. This was it. Prince Kieran's trap sprung. Refusal was impossible. I loaded a tray with the requested brandy and ascended the narrow stairs, every step feeling like a march toward an executioner's block. The room was dim, lit by a single fire. Prince Kieran stood by the hearth, alone. He turned as I entered, his golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Close the door, Ilara," he said, his voice deceptively soft. I did, setting the tray down on the heavy table. The door clicked shut with a dreadful finality. "I intrigue you," he began, strolling toward me. "Most humans, they have a smell about them. Fear, servility. You smell of nothing. It's as if you're not really here." He stopped uncomfortably close, or as if you're hiding something much more interesting underneath. "I am just a servant, Your Highness," I said, keeping my gaze lowered, my posture meek. "And are you?" He reached out and with a shocking gentleness lifted my chin, forcing me to look at him. "When I was a boy, my tutors made me study history. There were tales of human women, warriors and spies who could move like shadows and strike like vipers. They were called the Silent Sisters. My father had them all killed, you know, said they were a threat to the realm. But what if one survived? What if she was hiding right under our noses?" The air left my lungs. He knew, or he suspected enough to be dangerous. "I don't know those stories, Your Highness," I whispered, the lie brittle on my tongue. "Don't you?" His smile turned vicious. "Let's find out." His free hand shot out, not to caress, but to grab my wrist at a crushing grip, a test of strength. The move was sudden, brutal. The ghost of Alara screamed to freeze, to submit, but the memory of Anya was louder. When a predator tests you, it seeks weakness. Show none. My body moved without conscious thought. I didn't pull away. I stepped into him, using his own grip as a pivot, my other hand coming up in a sharp, precise blow to the nerve cluster under his arm. His grip loosened in shocked paralysis for a split second. That was all I needed. I twisted free, putting the heavy oak table between us in a fluid motion. He stared at his numbed hand, then at me, his expression morphing from surprise to naked, exhilarating fury. And something else, a glint of triumphant confirmation. "So," he breathed, a hunter who had finally cornered his real prey. "The ghost has teeth." "I wish only to serve my betters and be left in peace," I said, my voice now steady and cold, all pretense of the trembling servant gone. "Peace," he laughed, a short, harsh sound. "There is no peace for things like you, sister, only usefulness, or extinction." He flexed his hand, the feeling returning. "My father is a sentimental old fool, clinging to outdated alliances. Lord Malachor and I, we see a stronger future, one built on real power, the kind your sisters once hoarded." He leaned on the table, his eyes blazing. "You will serve me. You will tell me everything you know about the Sisterhood's secrets, their vaults, their magic. You will be my key. And if I refuse, then I will drag you before the court and reveal you as a surviving terrorist, an enemy of the crown. My father's protection won't save you from the mob. Or," he added, his voice dropping to an intimate, terrible whisper, "I could give you to Malachor. He has such creative ways of breaking stubborn things." The threat hung in the air. I was trapped between a prince's ambition and a warlord's cruelty. The king's offer of alliance felt like a distant, fragile lifeline. At that moment, a commotion erupted downstairs. Shouts, the sound of breaking glass. Kieran's head snapped toward the door, distracted. It was the only chance I would get. I didn't run for the door. He'd expect that. Instead, I moved to the room's single, narrow window. It was meant for light, not escape, but I had sized it up the moment I entered. "You're not that desperate," Kieran sneered, turning back to see my movement. "It's a 3-story drop to stone." I didn't answer. I grabbed the heavy wool tapestry hanging beside the window, yanking it down with a rip of tearing fabric. In one continuous motion, I slung it over the windowsill, grabbed both ends, and swung myself out into the open air. The rough cloth burned my hands as I slid, not gracefully, but with desperate speed. I heard Kieran's roar of fury from above. The tapestry ended a good 10 feet from the ground. I let go, hitting the muddy alley with a jolt that rattled my bones, rolling to absorb the impact. I was on my feet in an instant, running into the labyrinth of back streets, the sound of the prince's enraged shouts fading behind me. I had not escaped. I had declared war. The ghost was gone. Elah, the would-be Silent Sister, was alive, exposed, and running for her life. And as I ran, clutching the hidden map against my racing heart, I knew where I had to go. The path was clear, lit by the flame within the crescent. The king had spoken of a storm. Prince Kieran and Malachor were brewing it, and I was the only one who knew where the lightning would strike first. It was time to visit the dungeon's dead end. It was time to remember who I was. The stone of the alley was cold and slick against my back. I pressed myself into a doorway's shallow recess, my breath a ragged, steaming cloud in the pre-dawn chill. Every sound was a potential threat: the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a sign swinging in the wind, the muffled curses of the tavern guards now searching the streets. Prince Kieran's fury would not be contained for long. The Bloodstone Tavern, my hiding place for 3 long years, was now a hunting ground. I was a fugitive. My fingers found the crumpled parchment in my hidden pocket, the map, the flame within the crescent. It wasn't just a destination, it was a summons from a past I had tried to bury. The king had given me a choice, but Kieran's threats had burned away all other paths. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to honor Anya's sacrifice, I had to become what I was trained to be. I had to reach the castle dungeons. Getting past the outer walls was a lesson in applied memory. Anya had drilled into me the patterns of sentry walks, the blind spots created by ancient leaning towers, the drainage grates that were just wide enough for a determined, slight-framed person. I moved not as a servant, but as a shadow, my senses stretched to their limit. The smell of damp moss, the feel of rough-hewn stone under my fingertips, the rhythm of guard patrols counted in my head, it all came back with a painful, vivid clarity. I was using the dead sisterhood's knowledge to infiltrate the Lycan King's stronghold. The irony was not lost on me. The grate I remembered was still there, rusted but intact. The metals shrieked a protest as I pried it loose, the sound deafening in the silent night. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the shout of discovery. None came. I slipped into the foul-smelling darkness of the runoff channel, the icy water soaking me to the knees. This was the underbelly of power, a place of waste and forgotten things. It was also, according to the map, a back door to the oldest dungeons. After what felt like an eternity of wading through pitch-black water, my outstretched hand found a rusted iron ladder bolted to the wall. I climbed, emerging into a dry, dusty corridor that smelled of age and despair. I was in the lower dungeons. Torches flickered in sconces far apart, casting long, dancing shadows. The red line on the map was clear in my mind's eye. I followed it, a silent wraith in soaked gray wool, past empty cells whose doors hung open on broken hinges, past deeper chambers from which only silence and a cold, dry draft emanated. The map led me to a dead end, just as it showed, a solid wall of immense fitted stones, slick with condensation. Despair threatened to well up. Had it been a trick, a final cruel joke from the grave? I leaned against the wall, my forehead pressing against the cold stone. Think, Ilara, the flame within the crescent. Anya's voice echoed in my memory, not from a combat lesson, but from a history lesson. We are the keepers of secrets, child, and the best place to keep a secret is in plain sight, behind a door that only a seeking mind can open. My eyes scanned the wall. Nothing, just stone and more stone. Then, in the flickering torchlight, I saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible carving worn smooth by centuries of dripping water, a crescent moon, and within its curve, the barest suggestion of a flame, carved so shallowly it was more a trick of the light than an inscription. My heart leapt. I pressed my palm against the symbol, feeling for a mechanism, a seam. Nothing happened. Frustration bit at me. Time was slipping away. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. The sisters didn't use brute force. They used knowledge. The flame within the crescent, not just a symbol of the order, but a literal instruction. The flame, fire, heat. I grabbed the nearest torch from its sconce. Holding it close to the wall, I let the heat wash over the carved symbol. For a long moment, nothing. Then, with a soft, gritty sound that was almost a sigh, a single stone in the center of the crescent, no larger than my palm, sank inward. There was a series of quiet, precise clicks from deep within the wall, and a section of it, a door perfectly disguised by the masonry, swung inward without a sound. Beyond was not a room, but a narrow descending staircase carved from the living rock. The air that wafted up was not dank, but surprisingly dry, and carried a faint familiar scent: parchment, dried herbs, and beeswax, the scent of the sisterhood's archives. I replaced the torch and stepped into the darkness, pulling the hidden door shut behind me. Total blackness enveloped me. I counted steps, one hand on the cool wall. 20, 30, 50. The stairs ended in a small circular chamber. As my foot touched the level floor, a soft, magical light bloomed from crystals set into the ceiling, revealing a sight that stole my breath. It was a library from a dream. Shelves carved into the rock walls held not books, but scroll cases of polished wood and metal. Ancient tomes bound in leather and strange, iridescent hides rested on reading stands. In the center of the room was a large stone table, and standing beside it, her back to me as she examined a massive, spread-out parchment, was a woman. She was older, her hair a long, silver braid down her back, her posture straight and strong, despite the simple, travel-worn gray robes she wore. She turned slowly, and I saw a face etched with wisdom and deep, unhealed sorrow. Her eyes, a piercing green, met mine. "Elara," she said. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, though rougher now, aged by grief. "You took your time." "Sister Linnea?" The name emerged from the depths of childhood memory. She had been Anya's closest friend, a master archivist. I had believed her dead with all the others. A sad smile touched her lips. "I am the last of the archivists, and you, it seems, are the last of the acolytes." She gestured to the room. "This is the Heartfire Vault, the one secret our betrayer never found, the true memory of the sisterhood." I stumbled forward, emotions I had locked away for years threatening to overwhelm me. Relief, grief, a painful sense of homecoming. "Anya, she saved me. She told me to forget." "Anya was wise, and she loved you like a daughter," Linnea said, her own eyes glistening. "But some things cannot be forgotten. The man who betrayed us, who sold the locations of our sanctuaries to the Lycan purgers for a title and lands, he believed he had erased us. He was wrong. We have been waiting, gathering, and now the storm King Theodric fears is upon us, and it is centered on that same traitor." "Who is he?" The question was a blade in my heart. Linnea's face hardened. She moved to the table and pointed to the large parchment. It was a detailed map of the kingdom, with markers and notes in a tight, precise script. "His name is Lord Valerius. He once was a human advisor to the old king, a man we trusted as a liaison. His ambition was a cancer. After the purge, he was granted vast lands and a Lycan title for his service to the crown of the old king, Theodric's father. King Theodric has always suspected him, but could never prove his treachery without sparking a war with the traditionalist lords who shield him." I stared at the name on the map. Lord Valerius. The name meant nothing to me, but the title, it was one of the most powerful in the realm. What does he want now? Revenge? Power, Linnea corrected sharply. Pure, absolute power. He has been conspiring with disaffected Lycan lords like Malachar, and, she paused, her gaze heavy on me, with Prince Kieran. They believe they have found a way to awaken an ancient, forbidden magic, the Soul Forge. The word meant nothing to me, but the dread in Linnea's voice was palpable. It is an artifact of unspeakable power from the Age of Sundering, she explained, unrolling another older scroll that showed terrifying archaic diagrams. Legend says it can amplify a Lycan's natural abilities 100-fold, granting not just strength and speed, but dominion over the minds of other Lycans. It would create an unstoppable army, bound to the will of a single ruler. But to activate it requires a sacrifice, a ritual of binding, using the life force of someone whose spirit is anchored, someone trained in the mental disciplines of the sisterhood. The horrible truth crashed down on me. Me, I whispered. That's why Kieran was so interested. That's why he wanted to break me. He doesn't just want the sisterhood's secrets. He wants me as a battery for this thing. Linnea nodded grimly. They have the artifact. Malachar's men looted it from a dig in the eastern mountains. They have the traitor, Valerius, who knows the old lore, and they have a willing prince, hungry for a throne he fears his father's caution will never let him grasp. They lack only the key, the anchored soul to power the forge. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Kieran's testing, his threats, his alliance with Malachar. I wasn't just a political pawn or a trophy. I was a crucial component in a plot to overthrow the... The silver and gold pendant was a cold, reassuring weight against my chest, a tangible link to the ghost of Anya and the living, breathing purpose of Sister Linnea. It was also a declaration of war, worn openly. As I followed Linnea up a different, more gradual staircase that emerged through a cleverly disguised flagstone in the floor of the castle's ancient, disused scriptorium, I felt the final vestiges of the servant girl slough away. My soaked dress was gone, replaced by simple, dark gray trousers and a tunic Linnea had produced, garments that allowed for movement, for breath, for fight. My hair was braided tightly back. I was a blade being drawn from its sheath. The scriptorium was a tomb of knowledge, dust motes dancing in slants of morning light from high, narrow windows. Linnea paused, her hand on my arm. Theodric will be in the West Solar at this hour, taking his morning counsel. I cannot go with you. My face is known to Valerius from the old days. My presence would confirm your connection to us too blatantly and put you in greater danger. You must do this alone. Alone, the word echoed. I was to walk into the court of the Lycan king, a human, a former servant, and claim the mantle of a legendary extinct order. It was madness. How will I get to him? I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. With the confidence of someone who belongs, Linnea said, her green eyes sharp. Walk as a sister walks, not with aggression, but with absolute certainty. The guards will stop you. Show them the pendant. Say, I bear the eternal flame, and words for the king's ear alone. They will know the phrase. Theodric prepared them for it. He had prepared for me. The realization was a shock. This was not a desperate gambit. It was a coordinated move in a game of kings and traitors. I was a piece on the board, but for the first time, I knew my purpose. And after? After, you will be taken to him. Tell him everything. Show him the copies of the scrolls I gave you, the descriptions of the Soul Forge, the correspondence codes we deciphered between Valerius and Malachor. Then you will stay. He will place you in the royal household, likely as a scribe or librarian, a position of seeming obscurity with access to the castle's flow. You will be our eyes and ears, and our hand if needed. She embraced me briefly, a whisper of herbs and resilience. The light does not fear the dark, child. It defines it. Now go. I left the scriptorium and entered the living castle. The transition was jarring. The cold, silent stone gave way to bustling corridors, filled with the vibrant, intimidating life of the Lycan court. Nobles in rich velvets and furs swept past, their conversations a low, powerful hum. Servants scurried with trays and linens, casting curious glances at my unusual, plain attire. The air smelled of polished wood, perfume, and the underlying wild scent of predator. As Linnea predicted, I was stopped within minutes by two royal guards in polished breastplates, their hands resting on sword hilts. "Your business?" asked one, his gaze sweeping over me with open suspicion. I did not bow. I met his eyes and lifted the pendant from my neck, the silver and gold catching the light from a nearby torch. "I bear the eternal flame, and words for the king's ear alone." The effect was instantaneous, their suspicion transformed into sharp alertness. They exchanged a swift glance. The second guard gave a curt nod. "This way." I was escorted, not as a prisoner, but as a dignitary, through halls that grew grander with every turn. Tapestries depicting Lycan heroism lined the walls. The murmur of the court faded behind us as we reached a quieter wing. Finally, we stopped before a set of tall oak doors carved with the royal crest, a wolf and a crown. One guard knocked, spoke in low tones to someone within, and then the doors swung open. The West Solar was a room of light and warmth. Morning sun streamed through tall leaded glass windows, illuminating shelves of books and a large map table. King Theodric stood there, not in royal robes, but in a practical tunic, studying a parchment. Lord Commander Rylan stood beside him, a man with a stern, honest face. They both looked up as I entered. Theodric's gaze was the same as in the cellar, penetrating, measuring. But now there was no shadow of mystery. He saw the pendant, saw the change in my bearing, and a flicker of something like approval crossed his features. "Leave us," he said to the guards, and to Rylan. The Lord Commander looked as if he might protest, but a slight shake of the king's head silenced him. He bowed and left, closing the doors with a soft thud. We were alone. "Ilara of the Silent Sisters," Theodric said, abandoning all pretense. "Or should I say, Sister Ilara?" "Ilara is sufficient, Your Majesty," I replied, finding a calm center within the storm of my nerves. "I come with warnings and proof, as you anticipated." "Show me." I approached the map table and laid out the copies Linnea had given me. I pointed to the eastern mountains. Lord Malacor's excavations here were not for ore. They sought and found this. I placed the diagram of the Soul Forge atop the map. An artifact of the Sundering. With it and the correct ritual, they believe they can create an army bound to a single will. Theodric's face grew grave as he examined the ancient, sinister drawings. "Kieran," he breathed, not a question. "And Lord Valerius," I added, placing another page, a decrypted message detailing a shipment of ritual components to Valerius's estate. He is the architect. He provided the knowledge, the history, the means. He betrayed the sisters to cover his earlier treacheries, and now he offers this darker secret to buy a place beside a new throne. The king was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the outline of the Soul Forge. "I have feared a move from Valerius for years. He is a serpent, coiled in the heart of my court, protected by tradition and the wealth of his treachery. But this? With my own son?" He looked up, his golden eyes holding a father's deep pain. "You understand what you're asking, to stand against the crown prince?" "I am asking to help you save your kingdom from him," I said quietly. "Sister Linnea has proposed I remain here, within the castle, to observe, to listen, to be your unseen ally." He considered me. "You would be in constant danger. Kieran will know you are here. Valerius will suspect. They will watch your every move." "I have spent 3 years being watched by those who wished me harm. I am accustomed to it." A faint smile touched his lips. "Very well. From this moment, you are Ilara, a royal archivist, assigned to recatalogue the old text in the scriptorium. It is a suitably dull position that will explain your presence and give you reason to be in quiet places. Lord Commander Rylan will be your only direct contact within the guard. Trust no one else. He walked to the window, looking out over his city. The equinox is in 10 days. If the legends are true, that is when the ritual must be performed. We must find the Soul Forge before then. You will start in the archives. Look for any references Valerius might have missed, any old protections or weaknesses associated with the artifact. Lord Commander Rylan will coordinate searches of Valerius's and Malicor's holdings, but they will be hiding it well. He turned back to me, his expression solemn. Welcome to the war, Sister Ilara. May your whispers be sharp and your flame bright. My new life began that hour. A small chamber near the scriptorium was assigned to me, modest but clean, a world away from my tavern attic. The archivist's robes I was given were a deep blue, marking me as a scholar. I buried myself in the castle's vast archives, a mountain of crumbling scrolls and dusty folios. The work was real. I truly was cataloging. But my eyes scanned every page not for titles, but for clues, mentions of the sundering, of geomantic alignments, of rituals requiring an anchored soul. Days passed. I saw Prince Kieran once across the crowded great hall during supper. His eyes found me instantly, and the hatred in them was a physical blow. He did not approach, but his message was clear. I see you. This changes nothing. I also saw Lord Valerius. He was an older man with a carefully cultivated air of benevolent wisdom, his smile never reaching his cold, calculating eyes. At a court function, he even complimented the king's novel choice in archivists, his gaze lingering on my pendant a moment too long. The tension was a live wire in the air. I gathered fragments of information. Ryland's searches turned up nothing. The Soul Forge had vanished. Time was bleeding away. Then, on the 7th day, I found it, not in a grand treatise on magic, but in a marginal note in a ledger detailing the construction of the castle's oldest chapel, built over a natural cave system. The note, in an obscure dialect, read, "And the keystone of the southern arch was set above the blind spring, where the earth's breath meets silent stone, a fit guardian for burdens best forgotten." Blind spring, a geomantic term for a water source that feeds no river, that pools in the deep earth, a fit guardian for burdens best forgotten. My heart raced. I cross-referenced the chapel plans with older, pre-castle surveys of the bedrock. The blind spring was directly beneath. I rushed to find Rylan, sharing my discovery in a hushed, urgent whisper in the shadow of the stables. He listened, his face grim. "The king is reviewing troops at the western garrison. He won't return until nightfall. If we move now without his direct order, and we're wrong. If we wait, we lose our only lead," I insisted. "We don't need to seize it. We just need to confirm it's there. Once the king returns, he can order Valerius's access revoked and secure it." Rylan, a soldier to his core, hated the risk, but he also saw the ticking clock. "All right," he grunted, "but we do this quietly. You and me, we look, we confirm, we leave. No engagement." As dusk fell, we slipped into the service corridors. The entrance to the old wine cellar was in a secluded courtyard. The door was heavy oak, banded with iron and locked with a complex mechanism. Rylan produced some master keys from the royal locksmith. "For emergencies," he muttered. The lock clicked. He drew his sword, and I followed him into the darkness. The air was cold and still, smelling of aged wood and undisturbed dust. Racks of priceless wine bottles rose like silent sentinels. We moved toward the rear, where the oldest construction was. There, in the back wall, almost invisible behind a giant barrel, was another door, smaller, older, made of stone. It was not locked. It was sealed with a wax imprint bearing Valerius's personal sigil. Rylan broke the seal. The stone door swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. The chamber beyond was not large. It was a natural cave, the walls glistening with moisture. In the center, on a pedestal of black rock, it sat. The Soul Forge. It was not what I had pictured. It was not a grand altar or a shining crystal. It was a sphere of what looked like obsidian, about the size of a human head, shot through with veins of pulsating dull red light that seemed to drink the light from our lantern rather than emit it. Around it, the air hummed with a low, sub-audible frequency that made my teeth ache and my stomach churn. Symbols I had seen in Linnea's scrolls were carved into the pedestal and the floor around it in intricate, sinister patterns. "By the great wolf," Rylan whispered, horror in his voice. "It's real." We had found it. Proof. All we had to do was seal the door, inform the king, and... A smooth, clapping sound echoed from the cellar entrance behind us. "Bravo! Truly, a commendable piece of deduction." Lord Valerius stepped into the lantern light flanked by 4 of Malicor's green-clad warriors. He was smiling his benign, poisonous smile, and beside him, his face a mask of triumphant fury, was Prince Kieran. "I told you she was clever, Valerius. I told you she would lead us right to it." My blood turned to ice. The clue, the ledger, it hadn't been a lucky find. It had been bait, and I, in my urgency, had led Rylan and myself straight into the trap. "The king will be back soon," Rylan snarled, stepping in front of me, his sword raised. "The king is being delayed by a conveniently timed border incident," Valerius sighed, as if discussing a minor scheduling conflict. "A tragic skirmish with Malicor's border patrols. He will be quite preoccupied until well after the equinox ritual is complete." He looked past Rylan to me. "And as for you, my dear sister, your timing is impeccable. The equinox is in 3 days, and you have arrived, perfectly anchored and conveniently delivered, to power our new dawn." Kieran's golden eyes glowed with hungry anticipation. "Take them." The green-clad warriors moved. Rylan met them with a roar, steel clashing in the confined space. I had no weapon but my wits and my training. As one warrior broke past Rylan's guard and lunged for me, the world slowed. The ghost was gone. The archivist was gone. Only the sister remained. I sidestepped, using his momentum to send him crashing into a wine rack. Bottles shattered and the smell of vintage wine filled the air. But there were too many. Rylan was a whirlwind of skill, but he was 1 against 3. I saw a 4th warrior circle, aiming for his blindside. "Rylan, down!" I shouted. He dropped, and I hurled a heavy lead-corked wine bottle I'd snatched from the floor. It struck the circling warrior in the temple with a sickening thud. He staggered. "Enough!" Valerius's voice cracked through the chaos. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a small, dark crystal. He spoke a single guttural word. A wave of force erupted from the Soul Forge. It wasn't physical. It was a wave of pure psychic pressure, a scream of ancient captive rage. It hit Rylan and I like a physical blow. My vision swam, my muscles turned to water, and a profound, soul-deep cold seeped into my bones. I collapsed to my knees, gasping. Rylan slumped against the wall, unconscious. Valerius lowered the crystal. "The forge's whisper," he said pleasantly, "a mere taste of its power when properly fed." He gestured to his men. "Secure the Lord Commander and the oubliette. He may be useful. And bring the girl. It's time to prepare our key." As Rough Hand dragged me to my feet, my eyes met Kieran's. His triumph was complete. The hunt was over. The prey was caught. But as they dragged me away from the pulsating darkness of the Soul Forge, the cold pendant burned against my skin. The flame had not been extinguished. It had been taken to the heart of the darkness. And sometimes, a single flame in the deepest dark is all it takes to start an inferno. The world was a jarring carousel of torch-lit stone and brutal hands. They didn't take me to a dungeon cell. They took me deeper, into the castle's forgotten roots, to a place where the air grew thick and the sound of dripping water was the only music. It was an old guard post, long abandoned, but now hastily repurposed. Iron bars had been fitted across a natural alcove in the rock, creating a crude but effective cage. Inside was a straw pallet, a bucket, and chains anchored to the wall. They threw me inside. The impact with the cold stone floor drove the breath from my lungs. Before I could rise, one of Malicor's warriors, a brute with a scar across his lip, clamped a heavy iron manacle around my right ankle. The lock clicked with a sound of dreadful finality. The chain was just long enough to allow me to reach the pallet or the bucket, and nowhere near the bars. "Make yourself comfortable, little flame," the scarred warrior sneered. "You'll be here until the stars are right, then you'll serve a greater purpose." His laughter echoed as they left, bolting a heavy wooden door at the entrance to my chamber, plunging my cage into near darkness, save for a single guttering torch outside the bars. Silence descended, broken only by the dripping water and the frantic hammering of my own heart. I pulled against the chain. It was solid, the anchor ring set deep into the living rock. Despair, cold and slick, threatened to drown me. I had been so clever, so sure, and I had led Rylan to ruin and delivered myself to my enemies like a gift. I sank onto the straw pallet, the rough material scratching my skin. My fingers found the pendant, clutching it until the metal bit into my palm. "Anya, Linnea, I'm sorry. I failed." The thought was a poison. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the panic, to find the calm center Sister Linnea had always spoken of. But the cold of the dungeon and the darker cold emanating from the distant soul forge seeped into my bones, making a mockery of meditation. Hours bled together in the darkness. I had no way to mark time except by the eventual sputtering death of the torch outside my cage. When it died, the blackness was absolute, a suffocating velvet cloak. This was not the friendly dark of the archives or the strategic shadows of the tavern. This was the dark of a tomb. In that utter void, my other senses sharpened. I could hear the faint scuttle of something small in the rocks. I could smell the damp stone, the rust on my chain, my own fear. And then I heard something else, a voice, faint, distorted by stone and water, but unmistakably human. "I don't care what Valeria says. This place gives me the creeps. That thing hums right through the rock." It was a guard, stationed outside the door to my prison chamber. A second voice, gruffer, replied, "3 more days. Then the prince gets his crown, Malicor gets his army, and we get our share. Stop complaining." "Yeah, but keeping watch over a human girl, what's she going to do? Sing us to death?" "That girl put Goron on his back in the tavern and slipped the prince's grasp. Valerius says she's got sister training, so keep your eyes open and your mouth shut." The conversation faded as they moved away, but those few sentences were a lifeline. 3 more days, the equinox, and Rylan, they had mentioned an oubliette, a forgetting place, a vertical, bottle-shaped dungeon where prisoners were dropped and left. He was alive, but trapped, possibly injured. I was not dead. Rylan was not dead. The game was not over. It had simply moved to a darker board. The realization sparked a feeble flame of defiance. I could not break the chain. I could not pick the lock on my manacle without tools. But I was not powerless. I had my mind. And I had the training of the sisters, which was as much about mental fortitude as physical skill. I began to exercise, slowly, within the limits of my chain, not for strength, but to keep the cold at bay, to keep my blood moving, to remember that I had a body that could act. I ran through the mental exercises Anya had taught me, visualizing complex patterns, reciting historical lineages, reconstructing maps of places I'd seen only once. I was a prisoner, but I would not let my mind become one. When the torch was relit, signaling a guard change, I was sitting calmly on the pallet, my back straight, my gaze fixed on the bars. The new guard, a younger Lycan with nervous eyes, glanced at me and looked away quickly. Good. Let them see stillness, not fear. Time passed. A different guard brought a bowl of thin gruel and a cup of water, sliding them through a gap at the bottom of the bars with the tip of his boot. I took them slowly, with dignity, and ate. I would need my strength. It was during the next period of darkness that the idea came. It was born of memory and desperation. Anya's voice. The greatest lock is the mind's assumption of what a key must be. And Linnea showing me the hidden door, a door that only a seeking mind can open. My manacle was locked with a physical key, but the anchor ring in the wall, it was set into rock. Rock could be weak, mortar could crumble. I was chained, but the chain's point of failure might not be the lock. I felt along the chain to where it met the iron ring in the wall. I traced the edges with my fingers. It was old iron, rusted in places. The ring itself was set into a patch of masonry that filled a natural fissure in the cave wall. The mortar was ancient, a crumbling, sandy mixture. Hope, dangerous and bright, flickered in my chest. I had no tool, nothing metal to scrape with. I looked around my cage in the returning torchlight. The bucket, the pallet, the bowl. The bowl was thick, rough pottery. I picked it up, and with a quiet, controlled motion, smashed it against the stone floor. It broke into several large, sharp shards. I selected one with a good pointed edge and hid the rest under the straw. When the darkness returned, I went to work. Lying on my side, positioned at the very limit of my chain, I began to scrape and pick at the mortar around the iron ring. The pottery shard was a poor tool, dull and brittle. It broke often, forcing me to fetch another fragment. The work was agonizingly slow, the scraping sound terrifyingly loud in my own ears. Every time I heard footsteps outside the door, I would freeze, scuff straw over the debris, and retreat to the pallet, my heart thundering. But the guards were bored and overconfident. They checked through the barred window in the door sporadically. Scrape, pick, scrape, a tiny trickle of dust, then a small chunk. My fingers grew raw, my shoulder ached from the awkward angle, but I kept going, a silent, determined worm eating away at my prison. The mortar was stubborn, but it was old and weak in spots. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to loosen one side of the ring. It wiggled, ever so slightly.
The next guard change brought a surprise. The door opened and 2 figures entered the outer chamber. Not just guards, Prince Kieran and Lord Olarius. Kieran carried a lantern. He held it up, its light piercing the bars of my cage, forcing me to shield my eyes. He studied me, a predator examining caged prey. "Comfortable, sister?" he asked, his voice slick with mock concern. "The accommodations lack a certain charm," I replied, my voice hoarse from disuse but steady. He smirked. "It's only temporary. Soon you will be the centerpiece of the greatest ceremony this kingdom has seen in a millennium. Your life will fuel a new age. You should be honored." "I feel only pity," I said, meeting his golden gaze. "That a prince must steal power he cannot earn and ally with a traitor who sells his own kind." Kieran's smirk vanished. He took a step closer to the bars. "You speak of things you don't understand. My father's peace is weakness. His balance is stagnation. I will build an empire, and you are the kindling for its forge." Valerius placed a restraining hand on Kieran's arm. "Patience, Your Highness. Her spirit must be intact, her will unbroken for the ritual to work. Anger is a distraction." His cold eyes settled on me. "We came to ensure you understand the inevitability of your situation and to make you an offer." "An offer?" "Serve willingly," Valerius said, as if proposing a business arrangement. "Channel your energy into the soul forge of your own volition. In return, your death will be swift, painless. You will be remembered not as a forgotten servant, but as the catalyst for a glorious new dawn, a noble sacrifice." The audacity of it took my breath away. They wanted my cooperation in my own murder. "And if I refuse?" "Then the ritual will be more extractive," Kieran said, a cruel edge returning to his voice. "It will take longer, it will hurt, and in the end, your screaming essence will still fuel my throne. The choice is one of grace, not outcome." They were giving me a choice between a clean death and a tortured one.
It was no choice at all. It was just another form of cruelty. I looked from Kieran's arrogant face to Valerius's calculating one. The flickering lantern light glinted off the loose iron ring behind me, hidden in shadow. I had to buy time, more time to work, more time for the king to return, for Linnea to act, for a miracle. I let my shoulders slump, injecting a tremor into my voice. The servant girl mask, once my prison, could now be a weapon. I need time to think. Kieran's triumph was instant. He saw what he wanted to see. Broken spirit. You have until dawn tomorrow. Then we will have your answer. Willing catalyst or screaming fuel. They left, taking the light with them. The door boomed shut, and I was alone in the fresh darkness. But I was not broken. I was furious. Their offer had poured molten steel into my spine. I crawled back to the wall. My fingers found the loosened iron ring. The mortar was weak. With a new, frantic energy born of rage and a ticking clock, I attacked it with the last, best shard of pottery. I worked through the night, a creature of quiet, relentless purpose. My world narrowed to the scrape of ceramic on stone, the trickle of dust, the growing millimeter by millimeter movement of the iron ring. As a faint, gray hint of pre-dawn light filtered from some unseen crack high above, I gave one last desperate twist and pull. With a gritty, grinding crunch, the ring tore free from the wall, bringing a chunk of mortar and stone with it. I was free of the anchor. The chain still trailed from my ankle, the manacles still locked, but I was no longer tethered to that spot. I had a 6-foot radius of heavy, clinking iron, but I had mobility. It was not freedom, but it was a seismic shift in the geometry of my prison. I quickly piled straw and debris over the hole in the wall, hiding the damage. I sat on the pallet, the chain coiled beside me, my heart singing a fierce, silent song of triumph. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was contemplating my manner of death. They were wrong. Dawn was coming, and with it, my answer, not the one they expected. I was not kindling. I was the spark, and I was about to show them just how destructive a single, well-placed spark could be.
The gray light of false dawn was my accomplice, painting the chamber in shades of gloom that hid the evidence of my night's work. I sat on the pallet, the heavy chain coiled neatly beside me like a sleeping serpent. The manacle was still a cold, biting presence on my ankle, but the freedom of movement it now allowed was a potent weapon in itself. My body ached from the hours of cramped, secret labor, but my mind was sharper than a honed blade. They would come at dawn for my answer. I had to be ready. I reviewed my assets, pitiful as they were. One length of heavy chain, a broken pottery shard, now hidden, the element of surprise, and the pendant around my neck, a symbol, not a tool, but a reminder of who I was fighting for. My liabilities were more numerous. A locked manacle, a bolted outer door guarded by at least 2 warriors, the certainty that Kieran and Valerius were nearby, possibly with more of Malakor's men, and the Soul Forge humming its malevolent song somewhere in the deep dark, a deadline ticking down to my destruction. I couldn't fight my way out, not directly, so I would have to think my way out. Anya's lessons whispered in the back of my mind. When you are outnumbered and outmatched, change the game. Introduce chaos. Make the battlefield yours. The battlefield was this chamber. My cage was my disadvantage, but also my shield. They would not expect an attack from within it. The guards were my first obstacle. They were bored, overconfident, and saw me as a broken, chained thing. I would use that. I heard the bolt on the outer door slide back. Dawn was here. I arranged myself carefully, sitting with my back against the wall where the ring had been, the chain pulled to hide the freed end. I let my head droop, my hair curtaining my face, the picture of defeated resignation. The door opened. 2 guards entered, the younger, nervous one from before, and an older, grizzled veteran. The younger held a tray with the crust of bread in a cup. The veteran stood back, hand on his sword hilt, his eyes scanning the cage with routine suspicion. "Dawn girl," the younger guard said, his voice trying for toughness.
"Hey, you awake?" He nudged the tray through the gap with his foot. I let a small, pathetic sob escape my lips. It was the sound I'd heard countless times in the tavern from other servants after a beating. It was the sound of utter hopelessness. The younger guard glanced back at the veteran, who shrugged, his vigilance relaxing a fraction. The girl was broken, as expected. "Just leave it," the veteran grunted. "She'll answer when they come." But the younger guard, perhaps seeking to prove his mettle, unlocked the cage door with a large key from his belt. Prince said to check on her, make sure she's intact for the ritual. This was my moment. The door swung inward. He took 2 steps inside, peering at my hunched form. I moved. In one fluid motion, I surged up from the floor, not at him, but sideways, using the momentum to swing the coiled chain. It wasn't a weapon of finesse, but of sheer, surprising weight. The heavy iron links whistled through the air and struck the young guard across the shins. He cried out in shock and pain, stumbling forward. The veteran shouted, drawing his sword and rushing into the cage. He was focused on me, on the threat I posed. He didn't see the true danger. As he lunged, I didn't retreat. I dropped low under his sword arm and kicked the cage door with all my strength. It was already swinging. My kick slammed it shut with a resonant clang. The sound was followed by a second, more satisfying click. The latch, designed to lock automatically when shut, engaged. The veteran skidded to a halt, realizing his mistake. He and his younger companion were now locked inside the cage with me. I was outside of it. For a heartbeat, we all stared at each other through the bars in stunned silence. The roles had reversed with brutal suddenness. Then chaos erupted. The veteran roared, slashing his sword through the bars at me. I danced back, the chain on my ankle clattering. The younger guard scrambled for the key, fumbling at the lock from the inside. I didn't wait. I snatched the tray from the floor, ignoring the bread, and grabbed the heavy clay cup. The outer chamber door was still ajar. I sprinted for it, my chain a noisy, hindering tail. "Alert! Prisoner loose!" the veteran bellowed, his voice echoing up the stone passage. I burst out of the prison chamber into a narrow corridor. To my left, it dead-ended. To my right, it curved upward. I ran right, toward the promise of the upper levels, my bare feet slapping on the cold stone. Shouts echoed behind me, the sound of the cage door finally bursting open. I was free of the cage, but I was far from safe. I was a fugitive in a labyrinth, marked by the clanking chain, with every guard in this underworld now alerted. The corridor ended at a T-junction. I paused, listening. Running footsteps from the left. I went right into a wider passage that smelled of damp and fungi. This was the Undercroft, a maze of storage and ancient works. I needed to find a way up to the inhabited levels of the castle, where I could lose myself or find an ally. I passed alcoves stacked with crumbling barrels and rusting tools. My eyes scanned desperately for anything useful, a piece of metal to pick the manacle lock, a place to hide. Up ahead, a rickety wooden ladder led up to a trap door. Hope flared. I scrambled up, my chain making the climb perilous. I shoved at the trap door. It was heavy, but it gave, opening into a dim, dusty space filled with sacks of grain, a storeroom. I pulled myself up and let the trap door fall shut behind me, plunging the space below into darkness. I held my breath, listening. The pursuing footsteps ran past the junction below, fading. For now, I had a moment's respite. The storeroom had one other door. I cracked it open and peered out. It opened onto a deserted, narrow service hallway near the kitchens. The smell of baking bread and roasting meat was a surreal contrast to the dungeon's tomb stench. Dawn was truly breaking. The castle was stirring. I had to get this manacle off. It was a beacon. I slipped into the hallway, moving like a shadow, pressing myself into alcoves whenever I heard footsteps. I needed a metal pin, a nail, anything. I found my chance in a small repair alcove where a torn tapestry lay draped over a bench. A small toolkit sat beside it. My fingers closed around a thin, sturdy owl used to punch holes in leather. I ducked behind a large decorative urn and set to work on the manacle lock. My hands were shaking, my senses screaming that I was exposed. The lock was simple, meant to deter, not defy a determined escape. The owl was a poor substitute for a proper pick, but I used it to feel for the pins, my mind replaying a lesson Anya had given on basic mechanisms. Click, one pin set. Click, another. Heavy footsteps approached, the even tread of a palace guard on his rounds. I froze, becoming part of the shadow behind the urn. The guard passed within feet of me, yawning, his helmet under his arm. He didn't look my way. The moment he turned the corner, I went to work with frantic focus. Click! The final pin. With a soft metallic snick, the manacle sprang open. I ripped the hated manacle from my ankle, the raw skin beneath stinging with relief. I dropped the chain and the owl, leaving them hidden behind the urn. I was silent and unshackled. But I was still in enemy territory, dressed in dirty, dungeon-stained clothes. I needed a disguise, and I needed information. Where was the king? Had he returned? Where was Rylan being held? A scullery maid hurried past, her arms full of linens. An idea formed. When she disappeared around a corner, I followed, entering a warm, steamy laundry room. Lines of clean servant uniforms, simple gray dresses and tunics hung drying near the fire. In a moment, I had slipped a dry dress over my own clothes and bundled my hair under a clean cap. I smudged a bit of ash from the hearth on my cheek, completing the picture of a busy kitchen maid. Now, to listen. I picked up an empty basket and moved toward the kitchen proper, head down, blending into the morning bustle. The kitchens were a hub of gossip. Terrible fuss with the guards earlier, down in the old stores. Heard the prince is in a black mood, shut up with Lord Valerius. The king's return is delayed again, something about the Western Bridge being out. My heart sank. The king was still away. Valerius's border incident was effective. Then I caught a fragment that sent a chill down my spine. 2 senior cooks were talking by the main hearth. Strange deliveries to the old chapel cellar, all sealed crates. Malicor's men standing guard. Not a place for wine, that. Aye, and the chanting last night, low and awful it was, coming up through the stones, gives you a turn. The old chapel cellar, the blind spring, they were already preparing the ritual site. Time was evaporating. I had to find Rylan. He was a soldier. He might know a way to get a message out, to rally loyalists. The oubliette. I'd heard the guards mention it. I had a vague idea of its location from old castle schematics I'd seen in the archives, deep near the foundations, accessed through the old guard barracks. Abandoning my basket, I slipped out of the kitchen, adopting the harried pace of a servant on an errand. I navigated downward, into the older, more functional parts of the castle. The air grew cooler. I passed the entrance to the prison chambers I'd escaped. It was now heavily guarded by 4 of Malicor's green-clad warriors. They were on high alert. My escape had stirred the hornet's nest. I found the old barracks, a vast, dusty, cot-filled hall. At the far end was a small, iron-bound door. It was unlocked. Beyond it, a narrow spiral staircase corkscrewed down into blackness. This was it, the oubliette access. A single guard was posted at the top of the stairs, but he was distracted, talking in low tones with another guard who had just arrived. Just a precaution. No one's getting in or out of that hole, especially not with the spike pit open. Spike pit. My blood ran cold. Oubliettes sometimes had a removable cover over a pit of sharpened stakes at the bottom, a final grim deterrent. I had to get past them. I couldn't fight too. I needed a distraction. I looked around the barracks, and I spied a rusty old brazier in the corner, filled with ancient dry tinder. Moving silently, I tipped the brazier over, the dry kindlings scattered across the stone floor. From a sconce, I grabbed a torch and touched it to the pile. It caught with a soft whoosh, flames licking hungrily at the old resinous wood. "Fire!" I screamed in a convincingly panicked servant's voice. "Fire in the barracks!" The 2 guards at the stairhead spun around, their eyes wide. The new arrivals sprinted toward the growing flames, shouting for help. The posted guard hesitated, torn between his duty and the emergency. It was enough. While his back was turned, I darted past him and flew down the spiral stairs into the consuming dark. The air grew frigid and damp. The stairs ended in a small circular chamber with a horrific centerpiece, a gaping hole in the floor, about 3 feet across. A rusty winch mechanism held a frayed rope that disappeared into the blackness. The smell was stale water, rot and despair. And the spike pit cover was indeed removed, leaning against the wall. "Rylan!" I hissed down into the hole, my voice barely a whisper. "Lord Commander Rylan, can you hear me?" A long moment of silence, then a weak, rasping voice floated from the abyss. Who's there?" Relief washed over me. He was alive. "It's Ilara. I'm getting you out." "Ilara? How?" "The winch. The rope is too weak. It'll never hold." He was right. The rope was frayed to threads in places. I looked around desperately. My eyes fell on the discarded spike pit cover, a heavy wooden disc with an iron ring in the center, and the rope, though frayed, was long. A reckless, desperate plan formed in my mind. It was madness, but it was the only move on the board. "Rylan, listen carefully. I'm sending down the pit cover. You need to stand on it. Use it as a platform. I'm going to pull you up." "You can't. The weight. The rope will snap, or you'll be pulled in." "We don't have a choice. The ritual is being prepared now. We have to move. Get ready." I didn't wait for his argument. I looped the end of the rope through the iron ring of the wooden cover, tying it with the strongest knot I knew. Then, with a grunt of effort, I pushed the heavy disc over the edge of the hole. It plummeted down, the rope screaming through the rusty pulley. A second later, a thud and a splash echoed from below. "It's down," Rylan's voice called, stronger now. "I'm on it. Hold on." I grabbed the rope and pulled. The weight was immense. My muscles screamed in protest, my raw hands burning. I wasn't strong enough to lift a full-grown Lycan warrior. I wasn't trying to. I was trying to create tension. I braced my feet against the stone rim of the oubliette and pulled with every ounce of strength in my body, walking my hands up the rope. The winch groaned. The rope fibers stretched and popped, but it held. Inch by agonizing inch, I hauled the rope up, the wooden platform rising from the depths. Sweat poured down my face. My vision swimmed. The strain was unbelievable. Just when I thought my arms would tear from their sockets, I saw Rylan's hands appear at the rim of the hole. With a final guttural cry, I pulled, and he scrambled over the edge, collapsing onto the floor beside me, dripping and pale, but alive. We lay there for a second, gasping. He was injured, a deep gash on his forehead, his leg bleeding. "You are full of surprises, sister," he wheezed, offering a pained grin. "We're not safe yet," I gasped, pushing myself up. "They're preparing the ritual in the old chapel cellar. The king is delayed. It's just us." Rylan's expression hardened into that of the Lord Commander. "Then it's just us." He struggled to his feet, testing his weight on his injured leg. "We need weapons, and we need to stop them before that forge is activated." We were two wounded creatures in the belly of the beast. Above us, a castle swarmed with enemies. Below us, in the dark, a machine of ancient evil waiting to be fed. But a spark had been ignited, and a spark in the right place could set the whole world ablaze.
The air in the oubliette chamber was thick with the smell of damp, effort, and fear. Rylan leaned heavily against the wall, his face pale under the grime and blood. The gash on his forehead was ugly, and he favored his left leg. He was a warrior, but he was badly compromised. I was exhausted, my arms trembling from the impossible haul, my hands raw and bleeding. We were a pitiful resistance. But we were the only one. "Can you walk?" I asked, my voice low and urgent. Rylan pushed off the wall, wincing. "I can fight. Walking is a secondary concern." He limped to the discarded spike pit cover and ripped a long, pointed iron spike from its underside. It was a crude weapon, but in his hands it became a deadly short spear. He tossed me a shorter, thicker spike. Better than nothing. It was cold and heavy in my grip. Not a silent sister's weapon, but it would do. "The ritual site is in the old chapel cellar, near the blind spring. They're already preparing." Rylan nodded grimly. "Then we don't have time for stealth. We go straight there, disrupt the preparations, and destroy that thing if we can." "Just the two of us?"
The words escaped before I could stop them, voiced the sheer madness of it. The king's loyalists are scattered, unaware or being blocked by Malakor's men. We are what's here. His eyes met mine, fierce and unyielding. You've gotten us this far, sister. Lead on. We left the obsolete chamber, moving back up the spiral stairs. The barracks were empty, the fire I'd set now just smoldering embers. The guards had left to deal with it or raise the alarm. We had a narrow window. I led the way through the underbelly of the castle, retracing my path from my escape, but moving with purpose now, not panic. Ryland's limp was a liability, his breathing labored, but he kept pace, his soldier's discipline overriding his pain. As we neared the corridors leading to the old wine cellar and the hidden chamber beyond, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, carrying that same sub-audible hum that made my teeth ache, the Soul Forge's song, stronger now. And there were other sounds, the low murmur of chanting in a language that scratched at the mind, the clink of metal on stone, the tread of many boots. We pressed ourselves into a shadowed alcove as two of Malakor's warriors passed, carrying a heavy rune-carved chest. They were heading toward the chapel cellar. "They're moving the ritual components in," Ryland whispered. "We're not too late." We followed at a distance, using the natural acoustics of the stone to mask our steps. The entrance to the old wine cellar was no longer secluded. It was a hub of activity. Green-clad warriors stood guard. The door to the hidden cave was wide open, and from within pulsed a deep, bloody red light that seemed to throb in time with the humming. From our hiding place, we could see into the chamber. The Soul Forge sat on its black pedestal, its veins of red light pulsing faster, brighter. Around it, the floor symbols had been inlaid with fresh, dark powder that smelled of iron and burnt herbs. Lord Valerius stood before the forge, a thick, ancient book in his hands, his voice rising and falling in that guttural chant. Prince Kieran stood to one side, watching with feverish anticipation, his hands clenched into fists. And there were others, a circle of figures in dark hooded robes, their faces hidden, standing at intervals around the symbols. They held strange curved daggers that glinted in the evil light. Sacrificial blades. My blood ran cold. The ritual was not just preparation, it was beginning. They didn't need the equinox for the preliminary rites, only for the final activation. They were starting without me. "We have to stop them now," I breathed. Ryland assessed the scene, his jaw tight. At least 10 warriors visible, more inside. A direct assault is suicide. "Then we don't assault them," I said, an idea crystallizing with desperate clarity. "We assault it." I pointed to the Soul Forge. "That's what they care about. We break their toy, the ritual fails." "How? It's stone and ancient magic. My spike won't scratch it." I thought of the diagrams in Linnea's scrolls, the lore. The artifact was a focus, a conduit. It drew power from the earth's ley lines at the blind spring and was meant to channel a sacrificed soul. But conduits could be overloaded. Pathways could be disrupted. "The blind spring," I whispered. "It's a natural convergence. The forge draws power from it. What if we redirected that power, caused a surge?" Ryland looked at me as if I'd gone mad. "With what? We're 2 people with spikes." My eyes swept the chamber again, past the forge to the rear wall. It was wet, water seeping from a crack and collecting in a shallow, natural basin before draining into a crevice, the blind spring's outlet. And near it, stacked against the wall, were the crates the warriors had been bringing in. One was open, revealing dull gray bricks wrapped in waxed paper. My breath caught. "Is that what I think it is?" Ryland squinted. "Blasting powder, from mining. Malachor must have sourced it." A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Now that is a tool." A plan, insane and brilliant, took shape. We couldn't fight the army, but we could collapse their temple. "I need to get to that powder," I said. "Create a diversion at the entrance, draw them out." Rylan shook his head. No, you're smaller, quieter. You get the powder. I'll be the diversion. He hefted his iron spike. A Lord Commander doesn't hide while a civilian fights. There was no time to argue. I nodded. Create chaos. Draw them toward the main cellar entrance. I'll go around the back, through the runoff channel I used before. It enters that cave near the spring. He clasped my shoulder, a brief, firm gesture. May your flame burn bright, sister. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows, moving toward the front of the cellar with the grim purpose of a soldier on a suicide mission. I didn't watch him go. I turned and ran, back through the corridors, my heart a drumbeat of terror and resolve. I found the grate for the runoff channel, slid into the icy water, and waded with frantic speed toward the faint red glow ahead. The channel emptied into the ritual cave just as Ryland's diversion began. From the front entrance, a roar of challenge echoed, followed by the clash of steel and shouts of alarm. "Intruder! At the entrance! All guards, to me!" It was Ryland's voice, loud and commanding. I saw green-clad warriors turn and rush toward the sound, leaving only Valerius, Kieran, and the hooded acolytes in the chamber. Valerius's chanting faltered, his head snapping up in irritation. Kieran drew his sword, taking a step toward the commotion, but hesitating, unwilling to leave the forge. This was my moment. I hauled myself out of the channel, dripping in silence behind the stacked crates. My fingers trembled as I pried open the nearest one. The blasting powder bricks were there, heavy and ominous. I grabbed two, tucking them into the belt of my dress. I needed a fuse. My eyes fell on a coil of slow match, the treated cord used for lighting cannons or apparently ritual fires. I snatched it. The sounds of fighting at the entrance grew fiercer. Rylan was holding them, buying seconds with his life. I crept to the wet rear wall, to the basin where the spring water pooled. This was the convergence. Placing the powder bricks at the base of the wall, right where the water seeped from the rock, I wedged them into the crevice. I unspooled the slow match, embedding one end deep between the bricks. The other end I trailed back toward the channel, giving myself as much length as possible. My hands were steady now. This was it, the ultimate disruption. I turned to find a lit torch or brazier, but as I did, a cold voice cut through the cavern's din. I should have known the rat would find the deepest hole. Prince Kieran stood between me and the channel exit, his sword pointed at my heart. He had circled around during the fight. His golden eyes glowed with a malice that was almost tangible. Behind him, Valerius watched, a frown of academic displeasure on his face, as if I were interrupting a delicate experiment. Your soldier friend is brave. He won't last much longer. And you've saved us the trouble of fetching you. The ritual requires your living presence at the moment of alignment, but a few cuts now won't diminish your essence. He advanced. I backed up until my heels touched the stacked crates. My mind raced. The slow match was unlit. The powder was useless. I had my spike, but against a Lycan prince with a sword, it was a toothpick. You don't have to do this, Kieran, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. This power, it's corruption. It will destroy you, not crown you. Silence, he snarled. You understand nothing. This is my birthright, a kingdom of strength, not of my father's pathetic compromises. He lunged. I dodged, not away, but sideways, toward the soul forge. The spike in my hand was not for him, it was for the artifact. If I couldn't blow it up, maybe I could damage it, disrupt the symbols. I swung the spike at the closest rune on the floor, scraping through the dark powder. The reaction was instantaneous. The red light in the forge flared violently, and a wave of that same psychic cold I'd felt before erupted, but focused, directed. It hit me like a physical wall.
The days that followed the collapse of the Soul Forge were a blur of healing, testimony, and quiet revolution. The explosion had not just buried an artifact, it had shattered the foundations of a conspiracy, and the aftershocks rippled through every level of the kingdom. I was given chambers in the castle, not as a servant or a prisoner, but as an honored guest. They were airy rooms with windows that looked out over the city and the distant, mist-shrouded mountains. Sunlight, real and unfiltered from tavern smoke or dungeon stone, felt like a forgotten benediction. A royal physician tended to my raw hands and bruised body, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without starting at every sound. But sleep brought dreams, not of chains or red light, but of Anya's smile, of Linea's steadfastness, of the feeling of the earth itself rejecting the darkness we had buried. They were dreams of peace, and I would wake with the strange, soft weight of the silver and gold pendant on my chest, a reminder that I was part of something whole again. On the third morning, a gentle knock came at my door. It was Sister Linnea. She looked tired but serene, her green eyes holding a warmth I hadn't seen before. "Walk with me, Alara," she said. "There is something you should see." We walked through the castle's inner gardens, a place of ordered beauty and fragrant blooms. The air was sweet with the scent of rosemary and lavender. It was here, on a stone bench overlooking a small, clear pond, that King Theodric found us. He was without his crown or royal robes, dressed simply, the lines of care on his face still deep, but the storm in his eyes had settled into a calm, resolute sea. "May I join you?" he asked. We both nodded. He sat, sighing as he gazed at the water. "Lord Valerius is singing like a bird in a gilded cage, trading every name, every secret for the hope of a quicker death. His testimony, combined with the evidence you and Sister Linnea provided, has exposed a network of corruption that stretched from my border lords to my tax collectors. The purge, when it comes, will be judicial and thorough." He turned his gaze to me. "My son will stand trial before a council of peers and commoners. His fate will not be mine alone to decide. The law he sought to subvert will now judge him." There was no pleasure in his words, only the heavy duty of a king and a father. "It is a bitter outcome, but it is justice, not vengeance. That is the difference between a ruler and a tyrant." "You have saved your kingdom from both, Your Majesty," Linnea said softly. "We have," he corrected, his eyes moving between us. "Which brings us to the future." He leaned forward. "The Silent Sisters were a bridge between our peoples, a voice of wisdom and a hand of restraint. Their destruction was one of my father's gravest errors and Valerius's greatest crime. I would see that bridge rebuilt." Linnea's breath caught. "Your Majesty." "I am offering royal charter and protection, land for a new sanctuary near the border where your old one stood, funding from the crown to rebuild your archives, to train new sisters, human and, if they wish, Lycan. You would be an independent order, but recognized and respected within the kingdom, advisors to the crown on matters of history, magic, and the keeping of peace." Tears welled in Linnea's eyes, not of sadness, but of a hope so long deferred it was almost painful to behold. "You honor us beyond measure." "I am correcting an injustice." Then he looked at me. "And you, Alara, your courage was the spark, your will was the steel. This new beginning is as much yours as anyone's. The offer extends to you, a place in the new sanctuary, as a sister, a teacher, whatever you choose." The choice lay before me, as clear and sunlit as the garden path. I could retreat to a sanctuary, to a life of quiet study and measured purpose. It was what Anya would have wanted. It was what part of me craved. But I had spent 3 years being invisible and then weeks fighting to be seen for what I truly was. The thought of disappearing again, even into a noble cause, felt like a different kind of cage. "Your Majesty," I said, choosing my words with care, "my heart is with the sisters. They are my family. But I have learned that my place may not be only behind sanctuary walls." I took a deep breath. "The tavern, the castle, the dungeon. I saw the cracks in your kingdom from below. I heard the whispers in the dark that never reached the throne room. Perhaps the sisters need not only be archivists and advisors in a distant chapter house.
Perhaps they could also be listeners in the cities, in the towns, a gentle, watching presence that guards the light not from a tower, but from within the community. Linnea was looking at me with dawning pride. Theodric's brow was furrowed in thought. You propose an active sisterhood, integrated, a quiet network of guardians. I said, repeating an old sisterhood saying, the strongest flame is not the largest bonfire, it is the candle that burns steadily in the window, guiding the way home. A slow smile spread across the king's face. A sister in the tavern, he mused, and in the market and the garrison. Yes, I see the wisdom in that. A return to your oldest roots as keepers of the peace in the everyday world. He nodded decisively. Then let it be so. The charter will support both, the central sanctuary for learning and healing, and the dispersed sisters for watching and guiding. It was more than I had dared hope for, a purpose that used all of me, the ghost, the fighter, the scholar. Weeks turned into a month. The trials were held. Valerius, his crimes laid bare, was stripped of his titles and lands and sentenced to life imprisonment in the very oubliette he had consigned Rylan to. Malachor, captured trying to flee across the border, faced a military tribunal for treason and would spend his days in a fortified cell. Their networks were dismantled, their stolen wealth returned to the crown's coffers for rebuilding. Prince Kieran's trial was a somber, public affair. He showed no remorse, only a cold, defiant anger. The council, made up of lords, generals, and respected commoners, found him guilty of treason, conspiracy, and attempted regicide. The sentence was not death, as some cried for, but permanent exile. Stripped of his title and name, he would be taken to the furthest edge of the known territories and left there, forbidden ever to return on pain of death. It was a mercy born of Theodric's love, but a harsh, lonely justice. The day Kieran was led from the city, bound for a ship that would carry him to the edge of the world, the king stood on the highest balcony and watched until the procession was a speck on the horizon. He did not weep, but when he turned away, the silver in his hair caught the sunlight, and he looked every one of his years. Life in the castle gradually found a new rhythm. Lord Commander Rylan recovered from his wounds and was hailed as a hero. He was often seen in deep conversation with Linnea, their mutual respect blossoming into a firm friendship that promised strong alliance between the Crown's Guard and the reborn sisterhood. And I found my new rhythm. With the king's blessing, I took a small, tidy house near the castle gates, not in the servants' quarters, but in a street of artisans and scholars. It was my home and my base. I began the work of rebuilding the sisterhood's network. I sought out women of quiet strength and keen minds, a healer in the lower city, a scribe in the library, even a former barmaid from a different tavern who had a gift for hearing the truth in drunken ramblings. We met in secret at first, then more openly as the king's decree of protection became known. I was no longer a ghost. I was a known face, greeted with respect and sometimes curiosity. Children would point and whisper, "That's the sister who defeated the prince." I would smile and correct them gently. I helped protect the kingdom. Many did. One bright afternoon, as I was arranging a delivery of books from the castle to the new sanctuary building site, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to find King Theodric, alone, dressed for riding. "Walk with me to the stables, Alara," he said. It was not a command, but an invitation. We walked in companionable silence for a while. "The first shipment of stone for the sanctuary arrives tomorrow," he said. "A new beginning, carved from the mountain itself." "A strong foundation," I agreed. He stopped, turning to face me. "I am leaving for a time, a royal progress to the eastern borders, to show the people their king, to reassure them after Malachor's betrayal. Lord Commander Rylan will hold the capital in my stead." He paused. "I would ask you to hold something for me as well." "Your Majesty?" "The silence," he said, his golden eyes earnest, "the whispers from below. Watch over my city while I am gone. Be its quiet conscience. You have a king's trust, Sister Alara." The weight of the trust was immense, but it was not a chain. It was a purpose, freely given and freely accepted. "I will guard the light, Your Majesty, as I vowed to do." He smiled, a true, warm smile that reached his eyes. "I know you will." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. "When I return, we will have tea in the garden, and you will tell me what the stones of this city have whispered to you." He mounted his horse, a magnificent gray stallion, and with the final nod rode out through the gates, his guard following. The people lining the streets cheered, their voices full of hope and renewed loyalty. I watched him go, then turned my steps not toward the castle, nor toward my quiet house, but toward the Bloodstone Tavern. It was different in the daylight, less a beast, more a building. I pushed the door open. The familiar smells of ale and wood smoke greeted me. It was quiet, only a few old-timers nursing midday drinks. The barkeeper, a man named Harvard, who had mostly ignored me for 3 years, looked up. His eyes widened slightly, then filled with a new, respectful wariness. "Sister," he said, giving a clumsy nod. "Harvard," I replied, with a small smile. "I'll have an apple cider, if you have it." He blinked, then hurried to pour it. I took the tankard and sat at a small table near the window, where the sunlight fell in a warm square on the scarred wood. I was not hiding. I was observing. I was present. This was my place now. Not in the shadows, not on a throne, but here, in the living, breathing heart of the world, where light and shadow met. I had been a ghost, a weapon, a key. Now I was a guardian, a keeper of promises, a steady flame in the window. I took a sip of the sweet cider and looked out at the bustling street, listening to the rhythm of the city I had helped save. The future was not a fortress to be defended, but a story to be written, day by day, and for the first time in a very long time, I was eager to turn the page.